I think by the end of the journey and the end of Diana's journey, I see him as grief-stricken. I see him as somebody who carried an enormous burden through her death and her funeral.
A few of the people in the documentary also say that Charles probably blamed himself for Diana's death. I can't imagine, the heaviness of that burden to bear for all these years. And, can you kind of speak a little bit to that? And, he's never come out and said that before, but I'm sure in the back of his mind, that probably crossed his mind every now and then.
I think, again, in making the series, I think you have to have empathy with all of your subjects when you're making something like this. And I think with Charles, certainly in episode 1, we go into quite a lot of detail actually about what it's like to be Charles, the pressure, the kind of weight on your shoulders of knowing that you will be king. Yeah. I think by the end of the journey and the end of Diana's journey, I see him as grief-stricken. I see him as somebody who carried an enormous burden through her death and her funeral. Somebody who has to make impossible decisions. He has been criticized for the fact that the boys walked alongside him. But what do you do? And how many of us would make the perfect call every time with the eyes of the world upon us? So I think I have a lot of empathy for him. And I think that they don't necessarily want to do the job they're doing, these guys. And they are, again, I think that's where I have more empathy than perhaps I would have done 10 or 20 years ago before we even made this series. I kind of look at them slightly differently now. I kind of feel like, the pressure and the toll on their mental well-being is a factor that perhaps none of us really understood back then.
Yeah, no. And
we saw them as people that were able to do whatever they wanted. They were privileged people. They lived in this kind of gilded cage. And actually, I think we look back now and it looks very different, to be honest.
Yeah, well, you make a good point. Their whole motto is never complain, never explain. So we never really know exactly what they're going through. But, now that Prince Harry has kind of, opened up the doors a little bit and, discussed mental health, which is something that they've never really discussed before. It kind of shows how heavy this job really is.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think, again, to talk about legacy and to talk about, what I take away from having made the series and certainly having watched the series is that idea that Diana is at the forefront of a global conversation about not just looking inward, but speaking about how you feel. And I think certainly as a British person, and again, somebody who's lived in the US for a long time now, she really is a breakthrough. British people on any level of our society still really struggle to talk about their feelings and the impact of life on their mental well-being. And again, when you look back and you look at certainly her legacy through her sons, both of them are very open advocates for the idea of a more, honest and open conversation around mental health. And that has to be a good thing.